On March 19, 2011, Albert and Rita Chretien left their home in Penticton, British Columbia, for a road trip to Las Vegas. They were a quiet, devoted couple. Albert was 59, a semi-retired businessman with a practical mind. Rita was 56, a warm and steady woman who had spent her life as a homemaker and mother. They had been married for decades. The trip was meant to be a simple getaway, a chance to escape the lingering Canadian winter and enjoy a few days in the Nevada sun. They drove their Chevrolet Astro van south through Washington and Oregon, then into Nevada. Somewhere along the way, they made a decision that would change everything. Their GPS suggested a shortcut. Instead of staying on the main highways, they turned onto a remote road in northeastern Nevada, near the Idaho border. The road quickly deteriorated. Pavement gave way to gravel. Gravel gave way to dirt. Dirt gave way to mud and snow. By the time they realized they were in trouble, it was too late. The van became stuck in deep snow on a logging road miles from any town, any house, any sign of civilization. They tried to dig themselves out. They tried to reverse. Nothing worked. The wheels spun uselessly. They were stranded. The first night was the hardest psychologically. Albert and Rita sat in the van as darkness fell, listening to the silence of the forest. The temperature dropped well below freezing. They had no cell phone signal. They had told family they were driving to Las Vegas, but had not specified their exact route. No one knew where they were. No one would be looking for them on this forgotten logging road. They took stock of their situation. The van had about a quarter tank of gas. They had some snacks they had packed for the road. And in the trunk, they had something that would prove critical: bags of frozen food, candy, trail mix, fish oil capsules, and some beef jerky. It was not much. It was not a survival kit, but it was something. Albert rationed the gas carefully, running the engine periodically to warm the van, then shutting it off to conserve fuel. They wrapped themselves in whatever clothing and blankets they had. The nights were long and brutally cold. The days offered little relief. Snow continued to fall intermittently. The road remained impassable. They waited for a vehicle to pass, but none came. This was not a road people used. This was a road people forgot existed. Days passed. 3, 4, 5. The gas ran out on the third day. After that, there was no more heat. Albert and Rita huddled together under layers of clothing, using their body heat to survive the freezing nights. They ate tiny portions of their meager food supply, stretching each piece as far as possible. A few pieces of candy per day. A small handful of trail mix. They melted snow for drinking water, holding it in containers until it liquefied. The days blended together in a haze of cold, hunger, and waiting. They talked to pass the time. They prayed. They wrote in a journal, documenting their ordeal in case they did not survive. Rita would later describe those days as a kind of suspended existence, where time moved differently. Every sound from the forest made them hope. A bird call, a branch breaking. Each time they listened for an engine, for voices, for any sign of rescue. Each time there was nothing. Albert grew increasingly restless. He was a man of action, not suited to waiting. By the 7th day, he made a decision. He would walk out and find help. Rita tried to dissuade him, but he was determined. He believed he could reach a road or a town within a day or two. On March 26th, 7 days after they became stranded, Albert Chretien left the van on foot. He wore multiple layers of clothing and carried a small amount of food and water. He told Rita to stay with the vehicle. It was the standard survival advice. Stay with the car. It is easier to find than a person walking through the wilderness. He promised he would send help as soon as he reached civilization. Rita watched him walk away down the logging road until he disappeared around a bend. She never saw him again. Albert Chretien walked into the Nevada wilderness and vanished. His intended route was unclear. The terrain was brutal, a maze of forests, ravines, and mountains covered in snow. He had no map, no compass, no survival training. He was nearly 60 years old, weakened by a week of near starvation and freezing temperatures. What happened to him remains unknown. His body was found 3 years later, in September 2014, by hunters approximately 7 miles from where the van had been stranded. He had not made it far. The official cause of death was never determined due to the condition of the remains. But the distance told a story. 7 miles in 3 years of searching. The wilderness had swallowed him completely. Rita Chretien was now alone. She sat in the van and waited, as Albert had told her to do. She believed help would come. She believed her husband would find a road, flag down a car, and send rescuers back for her. Days passed. No one came. The food supply dwindled to almost nothing. She ate tiny amounts of trail mix, a few candies, fish oil capsules that provided some calories and fat. She continued melting snow for water. The cold was relentless. She wrapped herself in every piece of clothing she had, layering shirts, jackets, and blankets. She did not leave the van except to relieve herself and gather snow. She was too weak to walk far. She was afraid of getting lost in the forest. The journal became her companion. She wrote every day, recording her thoughts, her prayers, her hopes that someone would find her. She marked the days so she would not lose track of time. Outside, spring was slowly approaching. The snow began to melt in places, revealing mud beneath. But the road remained impassable and unvisited. She was surviving, but barely. Her body was consuming itself. She could feel herself growing weaker, her clothing becoming looser, her movements slower. By the 6th week alone, she had lost nearly 30 pounds. By late April, Rita had been alone in the van for over a month. The snow had mostly melted, leaving the road a muddy trench. Still no vehicles passed. Still no hikers appeared. She began to accept that she might die there. She continued writing in her journal, now addressing messages to her children and grandchildren. She wrote about her faith, her love for her family, her hope that they would find peace even if she did not survive. She was too weak to walk any significant distance. Her body had consumed most of its reserves. She estimated she was eating fewer than 100 calories a day, barely enough to maintain consciousness. Yet she persisted. She later described her survival as a combination of faith and stubbornness. She refused to give up, even when logic suggested there was nothing left to hope for. She sang hymns to herself. She prayed constantly. She talked to God as if he were sitting in the passenger seat. The isolation was profound, but she did not feel entirely alone. Something kept her going. Something told her to hold on for one more day, and then one more after that. By early May, she had been stranded for 7 weeks. She was barely recognizable, a skeletal figure wrapped in dirty clothing, surviving on nothing but willpower and snow water. On May 6, 2011, 49 days after Albert and Rita Chretien first became stranded, a group of hunters drove down the remote logging road on all-terrain vehicles. They were scouting the area for the upcoming hunting season. They did not expect to find anything unusual. As they rounded a bend, they saw the Chevrolet Astro van. At first, they assumed it was abandoned. Then they saw movement inside. A hand pressed weakly against the window. They approached and found Rita Chretien, barely alive, skeletal and filthy, unable to stand without assistance. She had been alone for 42 days since Albert left. She had lost nearly 40 pounds, dropping from around 135 pounds to approximately 95 pounds. Her body had consumed almost all of its fat and muscle reserves. Doctors later estimated she was within days of death when the hunters found her. The hunters immediately called for emergency services. A rescue helicopter was dispatched. Rita was airlifted to a hospital in Twin Falls, Idaho. where medical teams began the careful process of treating her severe malnutrition and dehydration. News of her rescue spread quickly. The story of the couple who had vanished for 7 weeks captivated the public. But alongside the relief came a question no one could answer. Where was Albert? The search for Albert Chretien began immediately after Rita was rescued. Search and rescue teams scoured the wilderness around the logging road. Helicopters flew grid patterns over miles of dense forest. Ground teams with dogs walked through ravines and along creek beds. They found no trace of him. The search continued for weeks, then scaled back, then eventually was suspended. The terrain was too vast, too rugged. A man on foot, weakened by starvation, could have gone in any direction. He could have fallen into a ravine. He could have succumbed to hypothermia. The forest held its secrets. Rita recovered slowly in the hospital. Her body had to be fed carefully, small amounts at a time, to avoid refeeding syndrome, a dangerous metabolic condition that can occur when nutrition is reintroduced too quickly after starvation. She spent weeks regaining her strength. She was interviewed by media from around the world. Her story of faith and survival inspired millions. But she was always clear about one thing. She was not the hero. Albert was the hero. He had left to find help, knowing he might not survive. He had given her a chance by insisting she stay with the van. He had sacrificed himself trying to save them both. Rita Chretien returned home to Penticton in late May 2011. She was greeted by family, friends, and a community that had followed her story with hope and heartbreak. She was alive. But the ordeal was far from over. Albert was still missing. For over 3 years, his fate remained unknown. Rita held on to hope that he might somehow be found alive, even as logic suggested otherwise. She spoke publicly about her faith, about her belief that she would see him again, whether in this life or the next. She became an unlikely public figure, giving interviews and speaking at events about survival, hope, and the power of holding on. In September 2014, a group of hunters in the Nevada wilderness discovered human remains approximately 7 miles from where the van had been stranded. Dental records confirmed what Rita and her family had long feared. It was Albert. The discovery brought closure, but also fresh grief. The family held a memorial service. Rita spoke of her husband's courage and sacrifice. She said he had died trying to save her. She said she owed her life to his decision to walk for help and to his insistence that she stay with the van. His choice, however it ended, had given her the chance to survive. Rita Chretien continued to live in Penticton in the years following Albert's death. She never fully recovered from the physical toll of her ordeal, but she found ways to move forward. She spoke at churches, community groups, and survival conferences. She shared her story not for fame, but because she believed it could help others. She talked about the importance of preparation, of telling people your exact route when traveling, of carrying emergency supplies. She talked about faith, about the thin line between life and death, about the choices we make when everything is taken from us. She never blamed the GPs that had led them astray. She never blamed Albert for leaving. She understood that he had done what he believed was right. He had tried to save them both. The logging road where they were stranded has since been marked and gated to prevent others from making the same mistake. The story of Albert and Rita Chretien became part of survival literature, studied and referenced by experts. But for Rita, it was not a case study. It was her life. It was the 49 days that tested everything she believed, and the decades that followed, carrying the memory of a husband who walked into the wilderness and never came back. She survived. She lived. And she never forgot.